Hi everyone, I'm Brent Shively, Product and Application Trainer for Festool North America. Welcome back to the shop. This build series, we're going to build an Adirondack chair to enjoy the great outdoors. This will match the table I built several build series ago. First thing we're going to go over is just the design and the materials, and then we'll go from there. So we fit this build into one video, but you can view specific chapters of the build in the timeline below. When I was designing this chair, I went around and sat in a lot of different chairs, took a lot of different measurements so I could get it the exact height that I wanted. When I designed it, it looked great, but when I built the prototype and sat in it, it just wasn't as comfortable as I wanted it to be. So that's one thing I'm going to change when I build the final version. So I'm going to extend the seat depth. I think that'll be the perfect chair. The final design for this chair will be available on a PDF version if you follow the link in the description below. As far as the tools that I'll be using for the project, I wanted to keep it fairly simple, so I'll be using the TSC 55K, the OF 1010R, the TPC 18, CXS, the Carvex to cut out some of our template material, and for the sanding we'll be using the ETS EC 125, the hand sanding pad, as well as the Shaper Origin and the Capex. I'll talk a little bit more about how I use the Shaper Origin for this project, but if you want to know a lot more detail, follow the link in the description. The material I decided to use on this project is cypress. In the Midwest where I'm located, it's not that easy to source. Another option would have been cedar, pressure treated. There's a lot of different options you could have used. The cypress that I purchased was 5/4, and I went ahead and I cut it to semi-close lengths, and then I milled it down to the thickness that I wanted, and I'm around 7/8 of an inch. When I went to purchase the cypress, the only widths they had were 12-inch wide boards by 16 foot. So what I ended up using was about 17 feet of material at this 12-inch width, and it worked out great for the pieces that I cut. So it may change a little bit depending on the size of material that you can get. So as far as the fasteners that I'm using, it's pretty straightforward. Using 5/16 by 2.5-inch lag bolts that are stainless steel with the nuts and washers, and then 1.5-inch stainless steel Torx head screws. When I was breaking down those 16-foot boards, I went ahead and rough measured all my pieces, marked them out so I know exactly what I need to cut them to. First thing I need to do is put a nice straight edge on all the boards that I can reference the parallel guides off of. Because of the non-skid strips on the bottom of the guide rail, I don't need to clamp it in place, but because the material is smaller, it tends to slide. So I'm using the low profile stop to keep the material in place while I make the cut. I'm going to go ahead and switch out the 42 tooth cross-cutting blade that comes with the saw to the 28 tooth ripping blade. It'll still give me a nice clean cut, but it'll also save me on battery life on the saw. Now I've got my depth set, my dust extractor hooked up. I'll get this one cut and then do the same to all the other pieces. To get the shapes desired for this chair, I'm going to be using a template. And because that template needs to be closer to the final dimension of the actual piece, I'm going to rip these down with the parallel guides now that I've got a nice straight edge on the board. If you want to know more about using the parallel guides, check out the link in the description. First cuts I'm going to make are for the back legs. Those will be 4 inches, and I just need 2 of those. So now I'm moving on to the 2 armrests. So I'll cut these about 5 1/4 inches. Again, just a little bit wider than they need to be, which is 5 inches. So when I put that template on there, I have enough excess to route off and make perfectly smooth. The next 2 pieces I'm going to cut are the seat supports, so what the seat slats ride on. These are going to be 5 inches, so I'll go ahead and leave this at 5 5/16, just like I cut the armrests. That'll give me a little room for that template when I'm routing that off. As I'm cutting, if I cut off what I had labeled before, I want to make sure that I relabel them. So when I put them in the cut pile, I don't get them confused with other pieces. So now I'll rip down the front legs of the chair, which are 4 inches wide. So what I can do now is I can use some of the leftover from when I was ripping the legs down to cut some of my back slat supports. And then I've got another piece here to help support the guide rail that I can cut the other one out of. The wider of the two back supports is 4 5/8 inches, so I'll go ahead and set that. So I'll use what's left over from the back seat supports and this piece to cut all my seat slats. With it all set up, I can go ahead and cut 14 of these. So this will be the last one of the seat slats. All we have left to do are the back slats. There's 8 total of them, but they're not parallel rips. All I'm going to do is set 2 1/4 on one side, 2 7/8 on the other. That'll give me my tapered slat to fit the curve of my back of my chair. We'll need 8 of these in total. After I make my first cut, next thing I want to do is I want to make sure I flip the board end for end. That's going to do 2 things. It's going to help me maximize the material in my board so I don't end up with a narrow sliver all the way up to a wider piece. And it's also going to help keep the grain run straight up and down, so when you're looking at the back of the chair, it looks like all those pieces are running parallel. With those 4 cut, I can do the same with this board. I've gone ahead and temporarily clamped up the slats from the chair. I've got a 3 5/8 difference from the bottom to the top. And by the time we add that to the curve of the back supports, it's going to give us that iconic Adirondack chair look. The final leg is going to be 4 inches wide. I'll be cutting this at 5 3/4, so the template has plenty of material around it to cut out that 4 inches. Now that I've cut all the tapers in the slats, I went ahead and reclamped it. Before I did that, I checked the grain patterns of all my material to make sure it's what I like. And then I flushed up the bottoms, left the tops run wild because I'm going to cut a radius in the top. A couple different ways to do that. First one is just the old tried and true, cut a stick as long as the radius that you want, put a screw in the bottom in the center, and then I just took a pencil, drilled a hole the same diameter as my pencil. You can mark your arc. The second way is by using the Carvex and the circle cutting jig. When I built the prototype, that's one thing I wanted to change was the radius of the top of the chair. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller so it's a little bit tighter of a radius. To do that, I'm just going to measure up 12 inches. And I know that I've got 8 slats, so I just find 4 in from each side, and that'll make my center mark. And then I'll drill a 5mm hole for the center pin of the circle cutter. With the center point marked and in place, I'll bring this out and I'll leave it about 1/4 inch shy of the shortest point on my slat. Tighten this all the way up. And I usually just like to mark an arc just so I can see what it looks like before I do the final cut. Before I change out the base and the splinter guard, I'm going to make sure that I take off the battery for safety. If you have any more questions about the Carvex jigsaw or setting it up or its bases, check out the link in the description. So with the base locked into place, I'm ready to make my cut. I'll go ahead and leave the dust shroud open for better visibility while I'm making the cut. With the radius cut, I want to make sure that I number all my pieces so that when I put it back together, that radius looks correct. I can go ahead and take it out of the clamps, put this stuff away, get ready to do the template routing for the legs, the arms, and the seat supports. So the next step in the process is template routing. It's one of my favorite parts of this process of the build. You really start to see the shape of the chair come to life. Now, there's a couple different ways you can create templates. In my case, I use the Shaper Origin. I'm not going to get into great detail on that. If you want to learn more about that, you can check out the link in the description. If you have a Shaper Origin and you'd like the SVG files I use to create these templates, they'll be available in the link in the description. If you don't have a Shaper Origin, there's all sorts of things around your shop that create templates. If we look at this template right here, this is our large armrest. We've got a straight going into a slight curve. I can use the bucket right here to create that radius. Then I can also use just a scrap piece of wood that's got some flexibility to it to create the rest of the radius. I can draw that on my template material, cut out the jigsaw, little light sanding, then I've got a perfect template. And I'll have all the measurements in the 3D drawing for where these radiuses start, the size of the radius, the length, everything to help you create that if you don't have a Shaper Origin to use. So when I first broke down all my material, I cut it extra long because I didn't have a good reference surface to get everything square. So now that I've got it all milled to the proper width, I need to break it down to the proper length. And the templates also come into play there. I can use my templates over at the Capex to set the correct length for my upper, lower back supports, as well as the slats in the lower seat. So I'll bring it over to my Capex, lower the head of the Capex into place, put it in the transport position, slide it up to the teeth of my Capex, move my stop into place. Now I know this piece will be cut the same as the upper back support as well as the slats for the lower seat. So with that set up, I can cut the upper back support, the lower back support, and then all the seat slats have to be the exact same length. That's what's going to determine the width of my chair. So I'll get all those cut and we'll move on to the next step. So with those pieces cut to the exact length of the templates, I can move on to cutting this curve and these flat spots with the template. To do that, I'm going to be using the OF 1010R and a 1/4 inch spiral templating bit. When you're using a templating bit and a template, I don't want to take off all the material at once. That'll be too hard on the bit and could be too hard on the router. So what I'll do is I'll trace this template with a Sharpie, and then I'll come back and remove the majority of it with the Carvex, and then use the router and the templating bit to get a nice smooth curve. And if I stay on the outside of that line, that's going to give me just enough material to remove with my templating bit to give me a nice smooth finish. So now I'll follow the same process with all the other pieces that need to be shaped with the templates. Now that I've got all the excess material removed with the Carvex, I'm going to use the OF1010R, a spiral templating bit, with the templates to create a perfectly smooth finish, much like I did with the legs on the bedside table. If you'd like to see that, follow the link in the description. I've gone ahead and I've installed the bit, I've installed the chip catcher, and the template taped to the bottom of my material. Now I can set the depth of the router. I want to make sure that both those bearings are riding on the template underneath the material. If you look at the base of our router, there's a curved arrow. That curved arrow indicates the direction that the router bit is spinning. That's also a good indication of which direction you want to run your router. And it's going to be cutting into the material. So as you can see, that spiral bit creates a very nice finish. There's a couple spots where there's little bumps, and that's probably from my template. I probably didn't get it as smooth as I should, so always be sure you smooth out your template and get it as perfect as you possibly can. I'll be able to clean that up with a couple of hand sanding blocks. Now I can remove this template and do the same thing with all the other pieces. Make sure when you're putting tape on your templates, you don't go overboard, because that tape sticks very, very well and you don't want to break your template. And I just lower it on, making sure I'm inside my lines all the way around. And then just put a lot of pressure on each spot where I put tape. So now I can flip it upside down so that the bearings of the bit can run along the template, clamp it down, and continue the process with all the other pieces. A lot of times it's very hard to get the backing of that tape off. So if you just take a hand sanding block with no abrasive on it, you're ready to go. With the template routing done, next step in the process is do a little bit of light sanding on all the pieces we've made so far. I want to look for any pencil marks left behind, any possible marks from the planers. Also, when I did that template routing, look and see if I left any chatter marks from the router bit. Just use a hand sanding block and my ETS EC125 to sand all the pieces. So rather than using clamps or clamping elements, I'll be using this pad. It's a non-skid pad that I can put my material on, and when you put pressure on the material, it doesn't move. Sand one side, flip it over very quickly, and sand the other side without having to clamp everything in place. The abrasive I'll be using is a Granat 120 grit abrasive on the ETS EC, as well as my hand sanding block. That'll give me a good finish, about the same finish my planer left behind. So we'll start with the back supports, making sure they're nice and smooth, and then we'll complete all the other pieces. The next step is to add a round over to specific edges of the material on the chair. For instance, this is the front short leg. We'll be putting roundovers on the bottom, the sides, but not the top, because this is where the armrest is going to sit. And when I attach that armrest to the top, I want a nice crisp joint all around that edge. I'll go ahead and put a mark where I don't want to put a round over. That way, as I'm going through the process, I don't accidentally round over that edge. I'll be using the OF1010R again. I added a 1/4 inch roundover bearing bit, a 36mm hose because I removed the chip catcher. Because when I use it on this non-skid mat, so I don't have to clamp down each piece, the chip catcher sticks down too low. I'll still catch the majority of the dust and debris with that 36mm hose. Those two done, I can complete the same process with all the other pieces, keeping in mind what I want to round over and what I don't. On the seat supports, I'm not going to round anything over. If you think about it, our seat slats are going to rest right here. I want a nice crisp, clean edge there. There's not going to be any hands touching any other parts of this, so what I'll do before final assembly is I'll take a piece of abrasive and just knock off any sharp edges, but I don't need to round them over. So with the armrests, obviously most of this is going to get rounded over because people's hands or arms are going to be all over it. So the only spot that's not going to get rounded over is from here to here, because that's where it's going to be attached to the back leg. So on the seat slats, I'm just going to do the top side of all the edges, but I'll leave the bottom alone. So all we have left to do are the back slats. There's 8 total of them. I'm just going to do all the edges and leave the bottom side alone. Now that we've got all the material prepped, the next step will be some pre-assembly. What I'm going to do is assemble the sides, which consist of the back leg, the front leg, and the seat support. To do that, I've set up a little jig. The reason I'm creating this jig is because I've got a curved back leg and I don't have a really good way to reference off that leg for the measurement of the seat support and to keep everything square. So I created a floor basically out of a piece of plywood, and I just measured off the front edge of that piece of plywood 29 3/4, because that is the depth of my chair from front leg to back leg, and I cut a 12-degree angle on both of those. That is going to match the angle at which the seat support sits. Then I can drill all my holes, put my lag bolts in, and move on to the second side. So to attach the legs to the seat support, I'll be using 5/16 by 2.5 inch stainless steel lags. I'll be drilling a 5/16 inch hole, 2 in each location. I went ahead and measured out where I'm going to drill the holes just so they look even on both sides of the chair. You can choose whatever dimensions you would like. With all the holes drilled on this side, next step is to add the lag bolts, the nuts, and the washers. So I'll go ahead and put them in. I won't tighten them all the way because then I'll put them back in the jig, make sure everything's where I want it, then I can tighten them down. So once I have everything snugged up, I'll put it back in my jig, verify everything's correct. Then I'll put some hand clamps on it, stand it up, and tighten it down with the wrench. If we look at the design, facing the chair, the leg assembly I just built will be the left-hand side. This one will be the right-hand side. Just have to make sure that you've got your legs alternating to create the correct side. Gone ahead and just put a clamp on each one of them to keep them upright, to hold them steady, while I now install the back seat supports with 1.5 inch stainless steel screws I'll be using a tapered countersink bit. But before I do that, I want to make sure that I lay out all the screw holes so they all look uniform in their placement. The bottom seat support gets secured where the radius for the seat begins and flush with the outside. I'll go ahead and secure this side, then that side. The installation of the upper back support is much like the lower back support. The only difference is there will be an overhang, which is the same thickness as all my material, because I cut this the same as my lower back support, which is cut the same as all my seat slats. So I just need to pre-drill and install the screws. The next step in the process is the seat slats. First thing I want to do is lay out the screw hole placement in all the slats, and then I can go ahead and get them installed on the chair. So I've gone ahead and I've clamped some scrap material on the bottom of the seat supports. So when I put my first slat up here, I've got support while I pre-drill and run my screws. Then once I get the first one installed, I made just a simple jig with two 5mm tenons. Those are going to be my spacings in between the slats. I can just set those up here, put my next one in. At this last piece, we'll specifically cut that to the final dimension to match the curve and whatever space is left over. So we'll stop with the seat slats for now. We'll move on to the back slats. Then once those are installed, we can come back and install the regular size seat slat and then the one with the radius on it. So what I'm going to do now is find the center of my bottom back support and my top back support so I can lay out my slats from that point. There's a total of 8 back slats. Once I find center, I'm just going to put a back slat on either side of that line. Now the back slats will have a 4mm gap, so I'm going to go 2mm on either side of my center line to get that start point. So installing the back slats is much like installing the seat slats. I'm going to lay out for one screw at the bottom. We'll get all the bottom screwed on, and then for the top, we'll get them spaced out, and then we'll actually draw a line in place to get those screw holes nice and in line. The screw holes in the bottom of the back slats will be the same for all of the back slats. Spacer block is much like the one I use for the seat slats, but this is a 4mm domino. So now I have all the screws installed on the bottom of the back slats. Now I can focus on installing them on the top. But to get that line perfectly straight, what I'm going to do is I found the center of my top back support, got a flexible piece of cut off cypress. Just line up those 2 points and push it in there. Now I can scribe my line and all my screws will be in line. Now I need my vertical line in from the edge so they're all spaced evenly. So what I've done is I've taken my spacer block with my 4mm tenon and I've measured from the tenon out 3/4 of an inch. That'll give me a mark right where I want my screw. And all I have to do is line it up, put a screw mark there, a mark there. They're all going to be spaced evenly. With all the back slats installed, I can finish installing the seat slats. We'll do the regular size one first, and then we'll do the custom one to finish up the seat slats. For the last seat slat, I'm going to have to measure the width here, create an arc, and then go back out straight to fill up that gap. So I've gone ahead and I've cut this board to the length of my seat slats. And then I transferred my set measurements that I already know, which is in from the outside of the seat support on both sides, and then in from my last seat slat, and then the center depth of what that arc's gonna be. So to find that unknown arc, I'm just gonna take a couple screws and put them in the corners here of those two measurements. And I can take that same flexible piece of cypress that I had, and I know the distance on my center point. I can just flex that in there and then trace it with my pencil, cut it out with the Carvex. So after I cut this with the Carvex, I left a little bit of my pencil line behind, so I'll come back with my hand sanding block, clean up those edges so they're nice and smooth, and I'll also knock everything down with 120 grit with the ETS EC125 to remove all those pencil marks. Then we'll get the 1010 router back out, we'll put a round over on all the top edges, then we can install it in the chair. No matter how careful you are, sometimes on these narrow pieces, the router could tip a little bit and create little grooves from your round over. It's an easy fix with the ETS EC125, a little sanding, and it'll look like it never happened. One of the last couple steps is to install the armrest. It's pretty straightforward. All I'm gonna do is put a mark from the table up to the bottom of the armrest that matches the same height as the front leg. Then I'll put a couple screws in it, and we'll do the same process on the other side. So with the back of the armrest attached, I can start working on the front. It's a pretty straightforward process. I'll put 2 screw holes in each armrest, and I'll take a board that is the same thickness as my seat support. I'll clamp it to the leg, move the armrest in and out till it's flush. That'll keep the armrest parallel to the rest of the chair. Last thing I want to do is make some brackets that'll go underneath the armrests on the front legs to help stiffen them up and also make sure they're square. I'm just going to take some scrap wood that we've already got, and I'm going to mark a point right where the radius starts, and then just create a nice slight angle. Doesn't have to be anything specific. I just want to make sure they're both the same on each side. Because the bracket is so small, I've gone ahead and created a bridge clamp to lock the material in place while I make the cut. To match the rest of the chair, I'm going to go ahead and round over a couple of the edges of these brackets. So now the chair is complete. I'm very happy with how it turned out. There's a little bit of light sanding left to do. I think for now, I'm not going to put any finish on it. I'm just going to let it age naturally. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this and you picked up a couple tips and tricks along the way. I think right now I'm going to go ahead and start designing the next build series. If you want to be notified when we upload new content, click that notification bell. Don't forget to subscribe.